what is the difference between fixed and variable rates?
It allows you to cover the risk of any increase in rate. And there are certain banks which are not very aggressive on mortgages, so they offer a higher pricing.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Talking Dubai Property. Today, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Gaurav, who is the owner of Lionmortgages. He is a trusted person in the markets that we put all of our business through when it comes to mortgage clients, and we are super excited to be with him today to discuss all things related to mortgages. So, first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Jade.
Hi, Gaurav. Thank you so much for coming in today. Please tell us, who is Gaurav, how you've started in the market, and where you are today.
Gaurav is somebody who's known in the market only for mortgages. I don't think I've done anything in my life professionally, anything other than mortgages. My first job outside of campus to date has been only mortgages, and it's something which I have a lot of passion for, and it drives me. I love talking to clients. I love asking the clients what their income is and what their age is in the first 15 seconds of the conversation. But it's what mortgages is what I am about. I established Lionmortgage in 2013 with my partner Joseph. And both of us have been mortgage bankers all our life. We've done mortgages as our first job in India. And then in 2004, when real estate finance started in UAE, we both were here. And I was with Standard Chartered Bank for almost 10 years before I left and started Lionmortgage. Lionmortgage completes 10 years this year. So, it's been a big milestone for us. We are now about 48 mortgage advisors, and we work with all the banks.
Congratulations on the 10 years coming. You mentioned that you're soon moving office and starting in a new venture in the new office, which is very exciting. Can you please tell me, first of all, why should someone use a mortgage broker and not approach the bank directly?
So a mortgage broker has been a fairly accepted concept and a service in the West, and where most of the Western expats are used to engaging a mortgage broker to help them identify which is the best product available in the market, what's most suitable, and also help them through the whole process. Now, theoretically, this gets magnified when we are looking at the UAE market. Largely because the banks have very, very different policies and they vary largely. So a client may not be eligible with one bank, but he's actually very easily eligible with another bank. That's one element. Second is the pricing is very different. So there are banks which offer a very aggressive pricing to the right set of clients. And there are certain banks which are not very aggressive on mortgages, so they offer a higher pricing. When a client approaches a mortgage broker, we are able to identify which is the best product for that client, which is most suitable for them, and also at times also be able to negotiate a better price for them. And the most important thing is that as a mortgage broker, I'm an entity. I'm there in the market. I'm going to be there all the time. So I need to ensure that the client's whole experience through the journey is very good. Unlike an employee in the bank who may want to only work on his part of the process for the mortgage and then pass it to another employee in the bank who then works on his part. So there's no one single owner who helps take the process from the start right up till the time the title deed and the transfer happens. So that and the UAE market is fairly complex in terms of the mortgage process, largely for the fact that a lot of information is not available and the clients are not exactly aware of what the real next steps are. So with the mortgage broker, that life becomes a bit easier and you pass the headache on to the mortgage broker to handle.
Definitely. And I must say from a personal experience that you guys especially, I've dealt with obviously other mortgage brokers from other companies, and Lionmortgages are really, really good. They definitely do follow up. They really push through. They are available after 6 o'clock, which is rare to find. But no, it is a pleasure to deal with you guys. Do you agree with me that it is extremely important to be pre-approved for shopping before shopping for a house, and why?
Yes. So again, as I said, the banks have very different policies. So some clients, when they come from a background which is where they know very well that they will be easily eligible for a loan in their home countries or wherever they were working previous to in coming to Dubai, they go with an assumption that they can get a loan very easily. But when they start looking for properties and then they realize that they finalized the property and they don't have an approval from the bank, it becomes a bit challenging because then they need to rush it through over there. Or sometimes they get a rude shock knowing that they are not eligible. A very simple example would be like we were just talking to one of your staff recently, that a client comes into the country, he's only 1 month into the job. Now, can he get a mortgage or not? Now, because he's working in a very, very good entity, he might just assume that he can get a loan very easily. But he gets a rude shock once he finalizes the property and then approaches a bank that the bank he wants to go for is actually asking for a 6-month employment history or wants the employment to be a confirmed employee. So these kind of things happen. And on the other side, sellers who are a bit more aware of this market, they insist on the buyer to either show that they have the cash or they have the money to buy the property, or they have the approval for the bank to buy the property. Now, and especially in today's time when there are fewer sellers and more buyers, and the buyers are competing for the same property, the seller would definitely engage with a buyer who's got a pre-approval in place. So both from a perspective of whether the client is eligible or which is the best product for him, as well as a perspective of giving confidence to the seller or the real estate agent, it is very, very important that a pre-approval is in place.
An excellent answer. And I try to tell clients all the time, but sometimes they want to insist. So when it comes to a client insisting that they want to see properties first, obviously it's very hard for us to turn away and say no.
Yes.
So sometimes we have to entertain. When we have these certain clients, is there an advice that you would give to someone that is adamant they want to shop first for a basic kind of calculation on how they could kind of calculate what they would roughly be able to spend?
So typically what we tell in a situation like this, we would say is that about 50% of your income, and it becomes a slightly easier for a salaried vis-a-vis a self-employed, but in a 50% of the monthly salary can go towards a loan repayment.
Sure.
That loan repayment could be a combination of all the other facility or loans he has, which means he may have a car loan, he may have a personal loan. All of that, the fixed obligation should not be more than 50%.
Yeah.
However, there are a fair amount of variables around it. So, for example, the loan amount eligibility might change based on how old is the buyer.
Ah, of course.
So if he's 60, then he can only get a 5-year or a 10-year loan. That means his installment is going to be very high, which might result in the loan eligibility being lower. But if it's somebody younger who can get up to 25 years, then the eligibility will be much higher on the same amount of income. So because there's so many variables, it becomes a little challenging to give hope. But yes, most of the times, the best way we would advise is that if the client doesn't want to apply for a loan, at least can have a chat with us. And in that discussion, we can give a 80-90% surety on whether the loan will be done and what the eligibility would be.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. For us, we always try to at least let them have a conversation if they insist, but sometimes not that easy. But we try. Gaurav, what is the maximum age limit for a mortgage?
So for a salaried, the rule is 65 years at the time of maturity of the loan, and 70 for a self-employed. However, if it's a UAE national, it goes up to 70 years for a salaried and 70 for self-employed. Certain banks are now willing to give a loan up to 70 years if there is a confirmation from the employer that there is no clear age limit for retirement. So then some banks are willing to consider up to 70 years for a salaried employee.
Okay, so just to confirm, if I was 70, I could get a mortgage for how long?
If you were 70 years, no. It is at the time of maturity. So
Right,
if it's
okay.
70, then you can't get a mortgage.
Okay. So what's the latest age that you could actually achieve?
67 theoretically, because
67,
you can get a loan for 3 years. The banks typically don't like to give a loan less than 3 years.
Yeah.
But
So the shortest
the installment
mortgage-
will be so high that the eligibility will not be there.
True. Okay. What is the down payment required to buy a property in Dubai for a local and an expat?
Okay. So for a local, it could go up to 90% of the property price if it is, if it's if it's below 5 million loan property value, and if the property value is above 5 million, then it would be 75.
Okay.
And if it's a resident, then it would be 70% for above 5 million and 80% for below 5 million. Now, what some of the banks also do is they're also willing to finance the registration fee and the broker charges at the same percentage. So that means if your property value is above 5 million, then they could get a 70% of the broker fee and the registration fee also funded from the bank.
I'm seeing a lot more banks do that. That's become a lot more popular?
Yes,
over
because
recent
with
years.
the increase in prices, the amount of contribution the buyer has to pay is become higher. So they go for banks where there's associated fee financing.
Can overseas buyers purchase a property? And if so, what are the requirements and the down payment?
Yes, overseas buyers can buy a property, unlike what a lot of real estate agents feel or they think that they cannot. Because when we get clients, a lot of them say, "Oh, I didn't know that we were able to buy, and I'm struggling now. It's good that we got in touch." So they can buy. Most banks will finance with 50% down payment, and 50% is the loan amount. There are certain banks which will also allow up to 40% down payment and 60% finance. The process is from a credit standpoint or from a loan eligibility standpoint, it's relatively simpler. But the banks focus a lot on the compliance side because they don't know the client that well. They're not in the country. So the banks focus on that side to ensure that they are within the overall compliant and within the regulations. The documentation is relatively simpler, and because the underwriters don't understand the income documents of people living abroad, and they don't understand the tax documents, let's say, of US or UK or even any European country or anywhere else. Therefore, they basically look at only the average credits in the bank account, and based on that, they give the loan. So they don't go into as much detail as...
So it is actually quite simple.
It's relatively simple.
Okay, very nice. Good to know. Currently, there are many clients approaching us that want to buy off-plan areas, such as Arabian Ranches Free, some in Dubai Hills, that are due to hand over in 6 months to 1 year. Can a buyer buy with a finance off-plan? And if so, what is the down payment and what are the requirements?
So most banks or almost all the banks do not finance on off-plan.
Sure.
But there are certain banks who will finance only at the time of, or they will all finance at the time of handover. The reason is banks do not finance off-plan is largely because when it's secondary market, there's a premium involved, and the banks don't want to take the risk on including the premium and the original price as part of the overall value of the asset, and then finance on that. On the other side, the UAE Central Bank restricts it at 50% financing. So most off-plan properties have 30 or 40 or 50% at the time of handover. So effectively, we see that the primary buyers, that means somebody who's bought directly from the developer, does not have too much of interest to approach 6 months or even earlier, but they would like to approach it only at the time of handover when that 40-50% is due.
Yeah. A lot of buyers think they can. It's quite a conversation. What are the best rates currently being offered in the market, and how do you see these rates changing in the next 6 to 12 months?
So interest rates, the lowest for a salaried right now is at about 3.99 fixed for 3 years.
Okay.
And for a self-employed would be between 4.3 to 4.5%, depending on the bank and the client profile. This is probably the best available, but on an average, the rates are at about 4.25 for salaried and 4.5, 4.75 for self-employed. in terms of the rates, there was an expectation that the rates would go down further. But after the Fed a few weeks back announced that they don't intend to change the rates or bring the rates down further for the next part of the year, that's 2024. Because of that, we've seen that the banks have started increasing their interest rates because they had reduced their rates in anticipation of the Fed reducing. But since the Fed decided not to reduce it further, they've now brought it back up.
Do you think it will increase more this year?
I don't think it will go up much. I do see it stabilizing, but I think the banks which are offering 3.99 today, fixed for 3 years, will probably stop offering in the next few weeks.
So it's a good time to get in right now.
Yes. If somebody wants a pre-approval, it's a fantastic time.
What is the difference for people listening that do not understand mortgages? What is the difference between fixed and variable rates?
So fixed rates, unlike one would think, it's not fixed for the entire tenor of the mortgage. It's typically fixed for a 2-year, 3-year, or a 5-year period. And then after that, it goes into a variable rate. And a variable rate is something which is directly linked to EBOR, which is very similar to LIBOR. And there's a margin and a floating rate. So EBOR is Emirates Interbank Offer Rate. And there's a margin on top of that, which the banks charge. That's a variable rate which is applicable from day one, or it is applicable on a fixed rate loan after the fixed rate period is over. We normally recommend clients to take a fixed rate loan because what it does, it allows you to cover the risk of any increase in rate. And theoretically, if there was a significant drop in interest rates, either you could go back to the bank and renegotiate or move the loan to another bank with a lower rate, because the cost of movement, unlike in most of the other countries, the cost of moving loan or early settling a loan is very low in Dubai. It's regulated, it's only capped, it's at 10,000 dirhams or 1%. Whereas in most other countries, if you take a fixed rate, if you break a loan early, you will probably pay 1 or 2 or 3% as early breakage charges.
What do you believe are the benefits of buying versus renting in terms of building wealth?
Oh, it's so interesting. I come across so many clients who have lived here for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and have been paying rents. Probably if you accumulate the whole thing, they've probably paid more rent than the asset they're buying now. And they just say, oh, I wish I had bought earlier. And I mean, I have nothing to say other than smile because, it's so, we hear it so often. So it clearly states that it's always better to buy. It doesn't matter what part of the cycle you are in terms of the real estate, because if you're buying a property just to live in, there's no right time. It's the moment you find your right property, you get a good feel about it. I think one should buy. As far as building a portfolio, I think this is one of the best places. I myself have been very successful in building a good portfolio for myself. And I believe that everybody who can do it in this country should do it. And definitely backed by a mortgage. And the reason I would say that is because the mortgage rates are much lower than the return you get on the asset. So therefore, from day one, you actually have a positive cash flow. And if you compare them with other countries, mostly the rental returns will be much lower than the interest you will pay on the asset, as well as all of the other expenses related to management of the asset. So it's not so attractive. But in UAE specifically, because also there's no income tax on the income you get on the asset, as well as the interest rates are lower than the rental yield. Therefore, it's a no-brainer just to go for a 50-60% finance and put in 40% and keep buying assets. And it's a fantastic second income.
Just for anyone that doesn't know, the first property down payment, 20%. So for the second property and the third property, the fourth property, what down payment would be required?
So first property is, of course, it's considered as an end-use property. So the central bank allows you to take a higher finance on it, which is 70% or 80%, depending on the value of the asset. It's 5 million above or below. And all subsequent properties, then it is at 60%. Now, certain banks also acknowledge the fact that if you have one property which is actually sitting at 60%, they are willing to finance you on a second property at a higher LTV of 70 or 80%, depending on the property value.
Are you able to take a second and third mortgage based on the rental income? of the other properties, or is it still the same calculation for, like, for instance, salaried employees?
So typically up to 2 or 3 properties, it goes with salary and it adds the rental income. But the moment you go into a 3rd, 4th or 5th property, then the banks are willing to just look at only the rental income, leave aside your other obligations, and give you finance only based on the rental income.
Okay, very interesting. That's really, really nice. And lastly, my final question. What advice would you give to first-time buyers in Dubai today?
I said it earlier, there's no right time. There's no right or wrong time to buy a real estate. It's very difficult to time the market. And I have personally experienced it a couple of times, and I've realized that most of the time I've tried to time the market in terms of buying and selling. I've never been successful. But whenever an asset is bought and it's kept for the long term, real estate always yields very, very good returns. And you could look at it from people who bought in 2004, they bought in 2008, before the crisis, after the crisis, in 2013, 14, and then again pre and post COVID. Anybody who's held on to assets has actually done extremely well. Now, for a first-time buyer, it's obviously better to buy than to rent, because the rental cost is going to be much higher. You'll always keep getting poked by your landlord who wants to maximize his returns. Keep getting notices every year, keep renegotiating on the rentals, or keep moving houses. So therefore, to avoid all of that, it's best to just buy and stay in your own house.
I could not agree more with you, Gaurav. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Very insightful information. If anyone has any more questions for Gaurav, we will add his contact details into the podcast. So please feel free to reach out to him. And thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you.